Fantastic. So as we were putting this together, we needed to kind of round out some of our strategic side of the talent triangle. So our first one that we thought is, let's do a piece around strategic thinking. And we talked a little bit about doing some design thinking elements within that, because there's an interesting parallel between design thinking and strategic thinking. And as I was putting this together, I'm like, you know what, there's so much to unpack here. I think we're going to turn this one into a series. So expect the next couple of sessions to be around strategic thinking and elements within that. And we're going to really start to unpack that a bit. Okay. As always, myself, David Donaldson, be your host today. Sound and technology, we always record these sessions, so if there's any issues there, you'll be able to catch up and watch them online. If you are having any difficulties, pop into the chat box there. Scott's helping us out today as usual, so he'll watch out for those technical issues. If it really runs into trouble, you can always watch the recording. Reminder of some of the tools at the top. You have the ability to raise your hand, so if you have a question or something. We've got the chat box open, available throughout. And as always, we do accept applause. Okay. Our opening thought today comes from Dr. Edward de Bono. And anytime I get into the conversations around thinking, I can't help but going to Dr. de Bono's work. He's most notably, probably most famous for 6 Thinking Hats, which is actually a tool for lateral thinking. And lots of really good stuff there, but he always had the contention that thinking is a skill, it's a process, it's an ability, and like any skill, process, or ability, it can be trained, it can be developed. So he spent his life's work around thinking and what that looks like and how to develop it and how to be more effective at it and so on. So I turned to his work and looked for a quote, and here's what I landed on for this session. Most of the mistakes in thinking are inadequacies of perception rather than mistakes in logic. And we think about that. So the real question here is, what is the perception of your situation? And what is the reality of it? Are we in alignment? Do we have a truly clear picture? Another element of that I really am a big fan of is the ladder of inference by Chris Argylis. And I didn't quite work it into this session, but it'll definitely be coming up in this series, and round how our perception and the actual reality of what's going on in the situations often has a bit of a disconnect. So we're going to start off today with a simple question. Where do you do your best thinking? And I'm really saying where/when. So I'm going to get you to pop into the box down the bottom here and type in where/when do you do your best thinking? Ah, love it. You guys are on the ball. We're already into multiple attendees are typing. From Santish, after a good night's sleep. Interesting. From Judy, first thing in the AM, first thing in the morning, and Angela in the morning. From Christine, after exercise. Morning in a quiet setting. Don't think well in noise. Absolutely. When no one is interrupting. Okay. On the car, in the shower, where, anywhere but when I least expect it. From Shirley. I love that answer, Shirley. Yeah. We're gonna dig into this in a moment, but I'm gonna just finish listening to you guys, and then we're gonna ask a question of why. Well, out on a long run, when I am present, focused first thing in the morning, when I'm being challenged, quietly sitting with my dog, from Diane. Oh, God, I love dogs, eh? From Ashley, I like in the car as well. Okay, fantastic. Now, what's interesting here is you notice no one said at work. No one said, at my cubicle, in my office, during the middle of the day when we're all being paid, to be at our best and to do our best thinking. So I want to move to our second question. And that question is why? Why did you answer what you answered? Why is it in the car or after a run or in the shower or with your dog or, why? What's the reason for that? From Sinette, no distractions. Love it. Yeah, because of course there's this myth that we can multitask, right? So we need to be able to focus. time and space from Diane. So these are key factors here because we need to have that time to think. And especially in today's fast-paced world, I think that's highly underappreciated. But also have the space to think. And we're going to unpack that a little bit in a moment, Diane. I think it relates to not forcing it from Ashley. Love that answer, Ashley. Um, this was a tough seminar to put together today because there's so much here. So as I was putting this together late last night, I'm like, you know what, this deserves a series. We're going to have to do a series on this. Um, so not forcing it. Um, when we look at how our brain works, we've got these two systems, system one, system two thinking, and this comes from Daniel Kahneman's work. And I want to do a whole webinar around that. So we're probably going to have something a lot more around how kind of our brain works and being able to think better. Because no distractions and alone, excellent. Yeah, head is clear, calm mind from Chris, love it. Yeah, less demands on my time from Donald. Yes, absolutely. So we get that chance to relax into it and to allow it to happen, right? More awake in the morning from Judy. Yeah, commenting on the calm mind. It's interesting because we wake up in the morning and our brain is clear. Many times I'm working on something late. I'm struggling. I'm not getting there. It's just not happening. It's like I need to go sleep on this. You wake up in the morning, you have this clarity of thought and vision. During the day, too many things going on, no time to think, right? So we're constantly reacting. We're getting into that knee-jerk mode, being forced to finding the solution under pressure. And I love that Santosh, the forced to finding the solution. We jump too quickly to the solution. So definitely going to be doing a piece around the ladder of inference in a future session and how we can be more strategic around that. Time to let the ideas arise, not forcing, absolutely. Most conducive environment, feel most at ease and relaxed from Jeff. Love it. Thank you. Not being hit with email. One of the great benefits of my job as a facilitator, as a trainer, and spending a lot of time doing things like these webinars and so forth, is that I actually am able to turn off my email. I'm able to turn off my phone and just be there, be present, be in the moment. So yeah, some great answers here today. Thank you so much. Okay. Now, this is all about being mindful versus being mindful. And the whole mindfulness piece, and we actually have a mindfulness practice here at Tidalshift, is about how do we clear the mind? How do we get that conscious mind with all of its distractors and stressors and emails and things? How do we get that out of the way so that we can have that clarity of thought? The other reason that I chose this one is it does really layer nicely with our concept of the perception and how a lot of our thinking and uh, our misdirection in that lands around how we're perceiving the world around us. So is our mind full? Is it full of stuff and it doesn't have room to work? Or are we being mindful of where we are? And there's it's expressed in many different ways. I've often heard it referred to as situational awareness. Are we really clear around what our current situation is and where we are and what we're doing? And are we being distracted? Are we having some false perceptions coming in and hitting us because we've got these other things that are going on? So it's really about kind of being where and why. Okay. So as we dig into this, I want to answer. Let's get a baseline first of all. Um, what is strategic thinking? And I'm going to pose this in two ways. What is strategic thinking and what is not? So I've got two boxes here on the left. I want you to type in any statements where this is what strategic thinking is, and in the right-hand box, pop in as to what it is not. And let's see what we build out with a list here. And Julie, thanks for the comment on the picture. I wish I drew it. It's if you Google mindful versus mindful, you'll get pages of that picture. It's a brilliant one, yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to give a few moments for a few things to pop in. I love this first one from Xantish. You've hit both sides of that coin. Long-term goals. It is not short-term solutions. But let's really look at that wording there. Long-term goals. destinations versus short-term solutions. So we often think of strategic thinking is problem solving. And while there's an element of problem solving in it, it is not problem solving. It's that longer, bigger piece. So let's take a look at what strategic thinking is. It's macro, it's planned, it's thoughtful, it's big picture, it's long term. Um, Looking at the topic from the big picture and that broad strokes, the overview. So it's that bigger, larger picture that we have, and typically longer term as well. Mental process to achieve success. So that's an interesting one. I think that's Beth, actually, if I recognize that name. Hey, Beth. Um, it is that bigger, longer term piece, right? Now, what is it not? It's not short term. It's not problem solving. And while I do feel that, Julie, problem solving is an element within it, it's a tool, it's an element, but you're absolutely right. Problem solving, that is not strategic thinking. Strategic thinking goes beyond that, right? Actual steps in the process. Love that one, Shirley. Yes, it's not the steps. It's the results of those steps. It's that bigger piece. So when we're down in the weeds as project managers, when we get into the steps, when we get into the problem solving, we want to be thinking, how does this relate to that bigger picture? It's not short-sighted. It's not reacting to situations. From Jody, absolutely. So while we do need to react within those situations, we're moving into the tactical side versus the strategic. I love this one from Salvador. It's not a workaround. Love that. And I was actually wrestling with this just earlier today. We had a bit of an issue with, we had to get a thing out to a client, and people were being helpful and like, here's a quick fix. No, I want to fix this properly. I want to fix this at a more strategic level so that we don't have this situation occur again, because I can just see us every time we get into the same situation, and it's a repeated situation. We're going to be getting into that whole, how do we do that last time, and what's the quick fix? Okay, there's a couple more. What is? Oh, sorry, from Diane. What is not the here and it's not the now, right? Now, while we have to be aware of that and cognizant of it, again, it's much like that problem solving. It's a piece within. What is strategic thinking? There's a couple more that came in from Angela. Vision. Oh, love that one. We're going to talk a little bit about that whole vision and destination piece. From Stephanie, taking into account the system, the organization pattern, and identifying as to influence to get what we want to get in the long term. Stephanie, you read ahead. Okay, so yeah, we're absolutely going there. The what and the where, get to where we want to go in that long term. Love it. Thank you so much. Okay, it's going to pop back into our regular mode here. So I think we've got a pretty good, clear picture of what it is. What strategic thinking is. It's ongoing, it's continuous, but it's also used at all levels, right? And this is a big difference. When we talk about strategic thinking, it's not a one-time event. So strategic thinking, strategic planning, those are two different things. They're very, very different. Strategic thinking is around the dynamic process of how we, have that ongoing continuous thought. And we can use it at all levels. So even project managers, even when we're down in the weeds doing that tactical work, we should still be thinking strategically. This is why PMI added that third side to the triangle, that strategic side, because we need to be looking beyond the borders of our projects. You look at the truly successful projects, those are the ones that look beyond the borders. It's not about time and budget. It's about the benefit that we provide to the organization in that longer, bigger piece. So hence, strategic thinking is not for strategic issues only. We can use it for that bigger piece. Now, it is a dynamic process, hence it's not a static process. So it's not a number of steps that we just say, okay, here's step one, step two, step three. Yes, we're doing strategic thinking. While there is a process there and there are steps, it's a very dynamic one. So those folks who are getting into Agile, you are already doing more of a strategic approach because you're having that sort of more dynamic element around it. But I like to sum it up this way. Strategic thinking is about the question. It's not about the answer. And this is kind of highlighting what we talked about with the whole problem solving piece. Strategic thinking is about asking the right question, or more correctly, the right questions. What does that look like in that bigger piece, and how does that all fit in? Now, is it important to get answers? Absolutely, because that's going to be how we're going to implement and execute on that. But really, it's about, do we have a good, clear picture of our understanding? Hence, is our perception in line with what our reality is? Okay. So I'm going to use a definition today of strategic thinking that comes from our work with Barnes and Conti. Wonderful folks. And we've been delivering a strategic thinking session that's Barnes and Conti for a number of years now. It's a really fantastic session. So strategic thinking is multifaceted. Okay, so it's not just a simple thing. There's multiple facets to this. It's an approach to thinking backwards, which kind of sounds a little odd, but we'll get there. It's an approach to thinking backwards from the desired result or vision. So we've already identified within what is strategic thinking is and is not. It's about the vision. Okay, so let's think about the destination, the vision, the result, where we want to go, and let's work our way backwards from there. But we're not going to use just one simple aspect. It's going to be multifaceted. Now here's the piece that I really love is the continually assessing how to achieve those results given the changes take place in the environment. So this is the dynamic piece. It's very dynamic. It's that ongoing, that constant reassessing. Label it however you want, but when you do good risk management, and when you redo that risk management, when you reassess it, you are doing a form of strategic thinking. When you implement an agile methodology and say, you know what, we're going to constantly reassess what the client's needs are. We're going to constantly revisit that, and as we develop, we're going to check with them and say, is this meeting what you need? Should we be adjusting it? You are doing a form of strategic thinking. So we have this in many different areas and aspects and elements, and this is why, as I'm unpacking this more and more, I'm thinking we really need to do a series of these webinars on strategic thinking. So to continue with the Barnes and Conti model, strategic thinking, we start off with the result or vision. Where do we want to end up? What's that destination? So what's our challenge? Where do we want to go? We then figure out where we are. Where are we starting from? Now, strategic thinking encompasses creative thinking, which is divergent, as well as critical thinking, which is convergent. So we start at a single point, and through creative thinking processes, we're going to expand on that. And we're going to look at different aspects, and that may be in the form of different points of view, properly defining the problem, what the challenge is. We want to frame that. It may then even go into coming up with some potential solutions around that, what those might look like. But what we're doing is we're increasing our knowledge. So we started at the starting point. We know where we want to get to. We're going to diverge in our thinking. We're going to add to it. Now, critical thinking is all about convergent thinking. And convergent thinking is, okay, now that we've generated 20 different options, possibilities, etc., let's start eliminating some of those so that we can come back to something that's going to work, something that's going to allow us to get to where we want to go. And I look at this idea of divergent and convergent thinking, and we see it in many different aspects, including design thinking, which we're going to tackle in our next webinar. It is all about taking that first idea, that the empathize, and let's expand on that. Let's garner more information, and then as we go into design, we're going to tighten that back down. So we have this divergent, convergent, divergent, convergent. We want to keep this cycle going, where we be creative, we add stuff to it, then we get critical and we narrow it down, and then we may loop back and redo this several times before we get there. But a key element to all of this is the systems thinking. And the system thinking, think of it kind of as the background, or the environment. Now, between creative thinking and critical thinking, that's going to bring us to our decision or action. But none of this happens within a vacuum. This happens within systems thinking. And a way to think about systems thinking is consider it to be the environment that's out there around us. So when I am doing this, I want to be thinking about, what is my environment look like? Am I in a for-profit organization? Am I in a public organization? Am I in a volunteer organization? What sort of environment do I have around me? What does that look like? Am I national? Am I local? Is it multiple offices? This sort of thing. And this is where perception versus reality really starts to come to play, because we often don't think about the environment that we operate within. Right? What does that look like? And I live out in the country. We're on a well, and I remember years ago when we first moved out here, we had an issue with our well, and our well went dry, and we had some water issues. we're at a cocktail party. I think it was over Christmas, and we're telling some of our friends around, as you do, right? We're telling our stories, and I remember a friend of ours is looking at me bewildered and says, "Why don't you phone the city? Like, why don't you phone the town, get them to come fix it?" Well, kind of doesn't work that way because we own the well, right? We own the property, we own the well. That's our responsibility, not someone else's. And what I've noticed after living in the country for a number of years is we're really much more in tune with our environment around us than some of the folks who live in the city. Years ago, when I lived in Cleveland, I remember going to the airport one day, and I hopped in the elevator. I went down the elevator to the basement, got in my car, which is in the underground parking, drove to the airport, it was just a horrible snowstorm. It was one of those ugly, sleety, snowy, wet days. Drove to the underground parking at the airport, got out of my car in a nice, dry, warm garage, walked through the tunnel. So they had this tunnel that connected the parking to the terminal. Walked through the tunnel, got into the airplane, and flew to Toronto. And so here I was in Cleveland, Ohio, traveled thousands of miles, well hundreds, um, got to Toronto, and the first time I stepped outside was when I got to Toronto. So I had done all of this without ever leaving the confines of our wonderful controlled environment. And you get into environments like that, and you kind of lose a bit of connection with what's going on outside. And people do this, and they'll do things like they'll go for a drive in the wintertime without boots or a coat or warm enough clothes that if they got stuck or if their car broke down or something, they'd be able to survive outside the car. And it's interesting because when you live in the country, you look in people's cars, you can kind of get a sense of where they live. People who tend to live out in the country and a little bit further out, they tend to have some survival gear in their car. So it's being in tune with that environment around you. And as project managers, we need to be in tune with that larger environment. It's very easy for us to get focused down into the project. Every once in a while, we need to turn and look out and see what's happening around us, so that we can be aware of what's going on and we can be aware of some of those things. So this brings us to our next question. And what might be some good questions since, oh, I think I hit the wrong one. Oh, I'm just going to clear this out here. I realized that I left the wrong question there. Okay, there we go. What might be some good questions to ask to help define our systems thinking? So we talked about strategic thinking being what was the strategic thinking is all about the question, not the answer. Systems thinking is an element of strategic thinking. So what might be some good questions that we would want to ask that will help us define some of our systems thinking side of things? Santish, influencers at play, absolutely. Surely, what is our budget? So we're hitting some low-hanging fruit pieces here, right? These are, key, very important questions, absolutely, but things that we want to be thinking about within our project. But let's start to think a little bit about outside the project, right? What environmental factors might be impacting our project, internal and external? Judy, can you expand on that a little bit? Because I really like that, and I just want to make sure that when we say environmental factors, that I'm using the analogy of the weather. But let's bring that back into more of a business context in a PM context. Identifying all the components of the solution. Oh, love that one, Salvador. And again, I'm going to ask if you can unpack that one a bit for me because I see some really good elements in there that I want to make sure we bring out. Funding model of the organization. Absolutely, Megan. And this is I'm a huge fan of Jim Collins's work. Good to Great, Built to Last. And he actually has a version of Good to Great for public sector. I think it might only be in an audiobook, but one of the things he says is he was, doing his thing one day. I think he was doing a presentation or a class or something, and someone came to him and says, this hedgehog concept, and the hedgehog concept is the three overlapping areas of what are we best in the world at, what are we passionate at, and what drives our economic engine. And he said, well, that's great for private sector, but that doesn't work for public sector, right? Well, he kind of, reflected on that a bit. Thought, well, it actually does because that third section is not where do you make money, it's what drives your economic engine. So when we think about funding models of the organization, is this a not-for-profit? Is this a for-profit? Is this a public sector? how do we justify what we're doing? And Megan, I'm so glad you brought this up because within projects, I mean, projects are often viewed as, this cost thing, sometimes even, necessary evil, costs us money, costs us money, costs us money. We need to, as project managers, be looking beyond the cost and the budget and be thinking about how is this going to turn into a profit or benefit for my organization. Now, depending upon the funding model of the organization, if we're in a for-profit organization, then I want to be really looking at how can this project that I'm doing create revenue? How can it drive sales? If, however, I am in a public sector organization, I want to be thinking about what services, what benefits is this going to be bringing to my constituents? And how is that going to be helping them? And how is that going to help us manage and attain our strategic goals? So we want to be thinking beyond just, I need to deliver this project on time and on budget. If you deliver on time and on budget, but it's not then helping driving that funding model of the organization, we're not gonna survive. It's not a good day. Um, so, you know, really important one to unpack. Um, from Humberto, resistance to change. Oh, love that one. Yeah. I'm going to juxtaposition that to what we just had around key influencers. Key influencers are often, chiming in, and we kind of view those as the ones who are the champions and are helping push the change forward. What if those key influencers are also resistant to change? What if I'm heading into this project and there's already lots and lots of resistance? What does that look like, and how do we prepare for that, deal with that, anticipate it, and so on? From Christine, what other goals or projects may impact the project now or down the line? Oh, love that one. Thank you, Christine. It's very much we need to be thinking beyond our borders and thinking at that larger, bigger picture level. And, one of the biggest challenges as project managers we face is resourcing. Resourcing, budgeting, we're expected to do more with less. We might not be the top project on the pile, right? We might not be the number one priority. So, what other projects are out there that could be either stealing resources away from us or we need to lend resources to? And that's okay because now we've got reason, we've got rationale, and we can justify that, and we can submit the change order and re-baseline our project with that's okay. Conversely, if we're the top dog on this hierarchy, we're going to be drawing and pulling and leveraging that absolutely. From Judy, it could be political, social, environment of the organization. Thank you, Judy. Um, Regulations, absolutely. So we think about the environment now. If we look at the political environment over the last couple of years, things have really been shaken up and really made some big changes, not only here in Canada but abroad. What are some of the social changes? Um, it's a defining event for me, but I remember the United Airlines incident where they dragged a passenger off the plane, and that hit social media, and that just went worldwide, and they lost $1 billion in market share overnight, like literally overnight. Now, the nice thing is when you have those types of things, they bounce back. But it's amazing how our environment is so different now. And someone who does one little tweet, one little picture, one little YouTube video, and it just goes viral and it goes around the world and everyone sees it. And it's interesting the way that whole environment and what we operate within is different now, right? Now the question becomes, is our project subject to that? Or are we doing a project that is much more isolated? Is it public? Is it within the organization so it's much more private and we can control that? And what does that look like? Also from Judy, the key issues, the stakeholders to be considered, absolutely. So, thinking about that whole environmental piece, love it. Stephanie, what are the patterns that might get the way to achieve the benefits we are looking for? Love it. Yes. So what have we done in the past? What patterns do those look like? And what patterns might get in the way, but also what patterns might assist us in moving forward? Because we definitely want to look at those. We tend to sometimes overemphasize the whole resistance piece. So we want to leverage not only, we want to mitigate not only what's preventing, but we also want to leverage what's enabling. Again, from Judy, market, what's happening within the market. Going to guess, Judy, that you're with private sector as opposed to public sector. Um, so absolutely. So what's happening with the market? Are we in a bull or are we in a bear market? Do we have lots of spare money around? Are we in a good profit model? Do we have lots of resources, or are we kind of running tight to the wire? Love it. Thank you guys. And finally, what are the correlations and interdependencies within the ecosystem? Oh, Jeffrey, that is an amazing question. Something that I think as project managers we often don't think about is how is what we are doing going to impact other elements, systems, processes, people within the organization. And this is where we can get into some of that unintended consequence piece. So we think about, okay, we're going to implement this new thing, and it's going to automate a part of our larger process. Great. What are the interdependencies? How is that going to interface with the next step down the line? What are the correlations to that? What are going to be the implications around that? And these are all fantastic questions that we want to be asking when it comes to thinking in terms of systems. So again, using that sort of cloud analogy where the systems thinking is kind of that background, the environment piece, we want to be thinking about what systems do we have. So just exactly what we were just talking about there. What are the correlations? What are the interdependencies? What are the systems we need? Now, this may be in the form of, we would really like to do X. And for us to do X, we need to interface with Y, but Y doesn't exist, right? So what systems do we need to be able to do that? And this goes back to 1999, and I just happen to remember the year. But I was at a conference, and we were talking about some online, some constant connection online technologies. And this is kind of the direction that things were moving. And the environment that I was working in at the time was a groupware product that was a occasional connection. So what you do is you'd work on your local server, and that local server would talk to the other local server, and they would, sync up their data. And hence I could be, here in Canada, in Toronto, doing my work, and then in the background the server would sync with, Sydney, Australia, and then the folks in Sydney would see what I'm doing and have that connection. And while there was a slight delay, it was a very effective technologies. And that technology was then moving towards an online constant connection, much like what we have today. So we, put everything up in the cloud, and the second that I, type in something, Sydney, Australia is seeing it as I type real time. So there was that kind of time delay. So we're moving towards this constant online connection. Well, keep in mind this was 1999, and we're in this conference talking about it, and someone from Australia stands up and says, that's really good for you guys in North America, but in Australia, we still pay per minute on phone calls. Now, this is pre-internet, like this is early stages of the internet. So this was when dial-up was still the way we connected, right? So when you did email and all that kind of fun stuff, it was over dial-up. So the technology had moved forward based on the background systems of North America, which at that time had just moved to a free local calling. For those of us who remember, you used to pay per call. So, when you're using your phone, every phone call you made, you were charged for. So much similar to what we sort of pay for on the per minutes with our cell phones today. We used to pay that on our landlines. And again, this is pre, broadband internet network connections everywhere. So we had moved in North America away from a landline pay per call to a free local calling. You still had to pay for your long distance, but I could talk all day on the phone to my girlfriend on a local call, no problem. So this led to technologies within the internet, email, at that time BBS, technologies to move towards a constant connection. And so, here we are at this conference, cutting edge technology, we're rolling this all out, and they're espousing the greatness of it. And then there's someone who's a key market for them stands up and says, that's great for you guys, it doesn't work for us because we don't have that background systems. So in North America, the question was, what systems do we have? We have local constant connection. Great. We can dial up and we can stay connected all day. In Australia, they didn't. So what systems do we need? Well, we needed that type of a system to be able to go to that level in that environment. right? We then now move into third world countries where even having power is a big deal. There's a friend of mine who does some charity work down in, and I forget which country it is, but he goes down and helps build houses, very rudimentary. And an element of that is that there's a small solar panel and a battery and a single light bulb. So the only electricity they have in this place is a single light bulb, and that gives them, light for a couple hours before the battery runs out, and then it charges the next day. So you think about, what are the systems that we have? What can we leverage versus what don't we have, and what do we need? Who are the players? So again, back to the whole influencers piece. Who are the players? Who are the ones who are going to support? Who are the ones who are going to resist? Are they big influencers? Are they highly impacted in this sort of thing? And that's where we get into tools like our stakeholder analysis tools. What skills do they have and what skills do they need? So much like the systems. Now, if we're rolling out a new system, so we answer the question, well, what systems do we need? Well, we need these systems. Great. Let's implement those systems. Okay, so that's now become part of our project. Now the question is, do they have the skills to use those systems? Do they understand them? Do they know how to do that? There was a fantastic study done in Montreal a couple of years ago. It's less of a study and more of a failed project. But a school board decided to do iPads for all their students. Okay, so what do we need? Well, we need what systems do we need? Well, we need iPads, and we need internet connections and Wi-Fi and all that kind of stuff. So they put all this stuff in place. Well, what they did, where they missed, is they didn't ask the question, who are the players? What skills do they have? What skills do they need? Because what they did is they literally dropped these iPads on everyone's desk for September 1st. Well, they didn't train their teachers. So the teachers didn't know how to use them. Okay, so they didn't answer that question, what skills do they need versus what skills do they have and what's that gap look like? And they kind of assumed that all the students would know how to use them. Well, only 50% of the students knew how to use them. So we got into this situation where students were teaching teachers how to use the iPads instead of the teachers running the class and doing the work. And the students who knew how to use the iPads were now bored, as the students who needed to learn how to use those iPads were developing the needed skills to get up to a base level. And of course, then they went off and played games on their new found iPads and things, and then they were all yanked out of the classroom, and the whole thing was deemed as a failure and so on. But really, what they didn't think about was that systems thinking aspect of it. They didn't think beyond the, hey, this is a really cool thing, let's put it in front of people. Everyone's going digital, right? Are there any current issues that are there? And what is the current climate? So that's why I think it was Judy, when you said about what's the environment. I wanted to unpack that, because what is the current climate? Are we in an age where everyone's wanting to move towards digital, and so hence this is going to be more well received, or people are resisting against that. You look at the current climate of just how we pay for things now. We don't use cash that much anymore, right? So you can kind of pretty much do all of your stuff with a card. And we take that idea and we look at that climate and say, what, people really like that, and they like the convenience and the quickness and the ability to tap. So the Presto card is introduced. And for those of you in Toronto, you ride on the GO train, the main commuter train, and you have your Presto card and you tap your card and bing, you're on, you're good. Right? And you can even set it up so it automatically reloads in the background. So this thing will never run out, right? You just go tap and away you go. Now that works great when you're on the train. What happens when you step off the train and then you have to, you're now in Mississauga or Brampton or Oshawa or Pickering, and you want to hop on the bus? Well, now all of those buses now accept Presto. So now with this one card, I can go from pretty much like London, Ontario through to Pickering almost, or Pickering, Oshawa, and just tap with my card and away I go. Right? So I don't have to have cash, I don't have to have tokens, I don't have to have exact change and get transfers and all this kind of stuff. And away you go. So we look at that climate and say, well, you know what? People are ready for that. They're wanting that. They're asking for it, right? There's a client of ours who, until very recently, did not allow Wi-Fi in their corporate head offices, because Wi-Fi is a huge security thing. And the Wi-Fi, I think, was brought in about 2-3 years ago. Why? Because the climate said we need Wi-Fi. I mean, you look at the technologies. What systems do we have? Well, our laptops no longer have network plugs on them, right? My laptop that I'm working with on today does not have a network plug. I have to plug in an adapter to be able to plug into a cable. It's all Wi-Fi now, right? Now, current issues. There was issues around security in the past, but that has changed because we have new systems, we have new, better security and so on, right? So these are all questions you want to be asking and thinking about as you're going down your project and as you're working your project and thinking about, what systems do we have? What do we need? How are those going to interface? Who are the players? Do they have the skills that they need? What skills do they have? What skills do they need? And this is that whole difference between perception and reality. What's my perception of the situation versus what is the reality, right? So, do we have a clear picture of the path ahead? What are the obstacles? What are the hills we have to climb? Because going uphill is harder. What are the hills that are going to help us? Because we're coasting downhill. We've got gravity on our side, that kind of thing. So this is kind of what all systems thinking is about. And so let's put this into a quick little bit of a true story metaphor. Um, Using our definition of strategic thinking, we've defined the desired result or vision. So I'm out in BC visiting my good friend Gary, and I say, what are we going to do? Let's go climb a mountain. Want a beautiful vista, beautiful view. He says, let's go up Mount Cheam. There's this Mount Cheam hike. It's an incredible viewpoint. We look online and we see all kinds of wonderful pictures. So here's our destination vision. Yeah. Now, keep in mind that the strategic thinking definition says we've defined the current desired, I'm going to highlight the word desired, result or vision, and then continually assess how to achieve the results given changes taking place in the environment. So we're constantly reassessing. And so we start out on our journey, we've got our destination, we've got our plan, we start out on our journey, and the first thing we encounter is a flat tire. So we now have to reassess. Now, for anyone who's gotten into any of the hiking in the mountains, it often includes a logging road to get there. So we've got our Land Rover. It's four-wheel drive, very capable vehicle. But we're about to drive down a logging road, and on this road, and I wish I grabbed a picture of it, but there was a pothole that was big enough to fit the car. Like we drove down into it and out the other side kind of thing. So now comes the question, can we still go ahead and do this with the spare tire? Are we still able to, our systems are diminished. Fortunately, one of the selection criteria for Gary for his new truck was that it had a real spare. So that should this occur, we're able to do this. So we continue on our way. We get to the trailhead. We're evaluating the map. We're looking at, what is our route. We've got this carefully planned out. We're thinking about where we're going, and it's a really nice hike, by the way. You start at I think 5,000 feet and go up to 7,000 feet, or you start at 7 and go up to 9, and beautiful views at the end. I highly recommend it. Just I wouldn't recommend it on a cold, snowy, blowy, low overcast day. So we get up to the mountain, and sure enough, the clouds are there. The snow is blowing. It's kind of some nasty weather. Now we left in t-shirt weather, and this is one of those things about mountains and what is your environment. For anyone who does anything in the mountains in the alpine world, because we're getting up to, and I'm pretty sure it was 7,000 feet was the parking lot, and then we would hike up to 9. You're getting up to some higher altitudes. You're losing quite a bit of temperature. It's on average about 2 degrees for every 1,000 feet. So we're at 9,000 feet. So we're close to 20 degrees drop in temperature. Um, as you go up, even in the summer, it's going to get cold. It's you're going to have potentially adverse weather and so on. So we're heading on up, and we really didn't plan for that because we hadn't really done the best job of checking the weather and things, and it was kind of a bit of a last minute thing anyways. So um, I'm shameful to admit that a couple of us did not have mittens and gloves, and we didn't have our ice spikes for our shoes, and our jackets were kind of on the low end of warm for the conditions that we encountered. So we got part way there, and then we opted to head back because we'd had enough. Um, but we think about this. So who are the players? And I've got myself, Jim, Diana, and Gary. Four fairly experienced people. Gary's very experienced, so he was acting as our guide that day. Um, he knew the mountain well. He'd been up it several times. What skills do they have? What skills do they need? We're going for a hike on a mountain trail. So it wasn't like we were rock climbing. It was it was more of a fitness level piece, right? What systems do we have? What systems do we need? Do we have the right equipment? Do we have the right, hiking poles and crampons for your shoes and so on and so on? But also, what is the current climate? So, we contrast this picture on a beautiful sunny day, with a gorgeous view, and then we look at what we encountered, and that's not even halfway up. I mean, as we were going up, we went from having a little bit of a view to seeing, a couple hundred yards, and we were just like, yeah, it's we could keep going to the top, so we could say we've been there. We're not going to see a single thing. Let's head back and do it another day, right? So we kind of evaluated. Um, um, we kind of evaluated the where we're at, who we've got on the team, what equipment we have, and said, you know what, let's head back. Um, so Donald commenting on my old Tilly. It's actually an oilskin, Australian oilskin, and I've had that hat since 1992, and it's had a lot of travels with me, so it's a good one. Thanks for noticing. All right. So what do we look at today? We looked at a model for strategic thinking, and that model balanced between creative thinking, divergent, increasing what we know, critical thinking, which is bringing it back down. Those two pieces are relatively easy, so we focused in on the systems thinking, which is that overall piece that sits in the back, and this is where I see a lot of opportunity for development. But when we think about our quote from Edward de Bono, most mistakes in thinking are inadequacies of perception rather than mistakes in logic. So my questions for you are you perceiving the worsening conditions? Are you perceiving the team's ability to cope? And are you perceiving the steepness of the hill, whether that's up or down? Um, and on that day, on that mountain, we kind of looked at the team and said, you know what? These conditions are worsening. It was the further we went, the wind was picking up, it was getting colder, it was getting snowier, the visibility was getting much worse. Our team's ability to cope was starting to get stretched. We didn't have crampons, we didn't have poles, a couple of us didn't even have gloves. So, we're kind of hiking along on a narrow path that's getting slipperier with our hands in our pockets and, kind of hunkered down and going, we're starting to get to that thin edge of mistakes at this point are going to be, something we can't deal with. We're getting to the edge of our ability to cope. And the steepness of the hill. We were heading uphill, it was getting steeper. So we decided, let's turn around, let's head back. Now, um, when we use that as an analogy and we think about what that looks like, as we're progressing in our project, is the conditions worsening? Are they getting better? And when I say the conditions, that may be in the form of the number of, Sev1 errors that we have in our code. That may be in the form of, the resistance that we're seeing and the amount of griping or pieces that come back on you and say, this is not going well and we should adjust course. What's your team's ability to cope? Are we running the team hard and fast? Are we at the edge of being able to get things done? And what's our ability to deal with something? Because if we're just on that edge of just being able to get the job done and we're not really having a lot of margin of error, something goes off the rails and it can be nasty, right? And then are you perceiving the steepness of the hill? And this may be a long, hard uphill slog that, this is why we've got slow progress. And that's okay because we're actually making progress. I remember chatting with a gentleman who climbed Everest. And he said, as you get near the top, it's literally take one step, rest. Take one step, rest. And this is even on oxygen. Like it's just like you are so on the edge of, being able to do that. But even just those those little steps, right? And are we climbing a steep hill or are we coasting down a gentler hill? And we want to be thinking about those kind of at that larger perspective as we're heading down our projects. Okay, a couple of comments that popped in here, so just gonna check in. From Laura, live near White Mountains of New Hampshire. Oh, White Mountains are beautiful. I did a trip out there in the fall and just drove through them with all the fall colors. Just gorgeous. People get caught in bad weather, don't have the right gear, can get in real trouble. Good call. Thank you, Laura. It's absolutely, and it's amazing. If you look in our webinar series, I actually did a session on risk management, and I did some pictures from the top of, I'm trying to remember the name of the mountain, Mount Washington. And it was two pictures 20 minutes apart, and in one picture you can see three mountains over, and the next picture you could barely see two, couple hundred meters down. So yeah, the conditions can change very quickly. So we need to be very aware of this. And this is, as I was putting this together, I'm thinking, okay, I want to focus in on the systems thinking piece, which is all about that awareness in the background. So from Judy, also live in New Hampshire, woo, in the Lakes region. It's some lovely country out there. So fantastic. Thank you guys. There is your PMI code. As I said, we started this session as a standalone, but as I'm going through this, there's so much here. I want to turn this into a bit of a series. So look for the next couple to be on strategic thinking. Judy,